emergency prevention specialist. And today we're going to be talking about parental beliefs and behaviors around youth substance use. So before we start, I just want to remind everyone, so this is the last webinar we're doing, and I really want to just bring home that the reason we're doing these webinars is out of concern for the healthy development of the adolescent brain and of teenagers into healthy young adults. And there's research that shows that substance use in any form is harmful to the developing brain, and as parents, it's so important to protect the well-being of our youth. So that's the point we're going to try and drive home, is that parents have a huge amount of influence over their children's decision to experiment with substances, and we're going to outline some tools that parents can use to do so. But before we do that, I'm going to hand it over to Jess, who will go over a little bit about data and results from the parent survey.
Well, thanks so much, Chrissy, and thanks everyone for being part of the webinar tonight. And so like Chrissy said, these sessions are designed to provide parents with information and resources they can use in helping to guide their children and support them in making those healthy choices. So I'm sure many of you already know how powerful your role as parents and caregivers can be in helping the youth in your lives make those positive decisions. And we know that it's especially true that when parents have articulated very clear expectations for their kids, when they are educated themselves and can be that voice that contradicts the many other messages that youth do receive on a regular basis regarding substance use, we know how effective parents' role can really be in preventing youth from initiating use. And so those are some of the underlying assumptions that will be part of our presentation today and behind the information that we plan to share. And so, like Chrissy said, I'm quickly going to share some information the Coalition collected through its parent survey, which was an anonymous, confidential online survey that parents in Dedham responded to, especially parents of children in grades 6 through 12. And the survey asked questions about parental attitudes, perceptions, and behaviors around underage substance use. And it really brings to light a lot of wonderfully positive things that the parents in Dedham are doing really well to support their kids' healthy development. And so what you see on the screen tonight is that most parents agree that it is very wrong or wrong for their kids to use these various substances, with somewhat less or fewer parents concerned that their kids might use alcohol when there's adult supervision. And we also know that a vast majority of parents, 94%, do believe that they can have an influence on whether their child uses alcohol or drugs. And 90% of parents do actually have and articulate clear rules for their kids about the use of these substances. So that was whether or not it is wrong. And now we'll look at whether or not parents in Dedham think that these types of activities are a problem within the community. And so here we see that opinions do differ about how much of a problem youth use of different substances is within the town. So you see ranging from 90% of parents agreeing that vaping is somewhat or very much of a problem to 62% believing that prescription drug use is a problem among youth in the community. And we know that also that many parents are talking to their kids about the potential negative consequences of substance use and are strategizing together, parents and their children, about what their kid can do to protect themselves in potentially unsafe situations, which is so important since we know that kids do sometimes find themselves in those situations. So among high school parents, a quarter have indicated that they've allowed their kids to attend parties where alcohol use occurs, and 20% have also allowed their kids to be at parties where marijuana use occurs. And so having strategies to call on, from teaching their kids refusal skills to safe exit skills or strategies like code words that the kid can say that will then cause their parent to come pick them up or give them money to make their own way home, are super important, and a majority of parents in the town are helping their children to build these skills. And while some high school parents and even parents of middle schoolers do allow their children to drink under supervision, in the prevention community, we try to encourage families to set really clear and unambiguous expectations of their kids. Since research tells us that when parents' disapproval of youth substance use is known and clearly communicated, it can really protect youth from starting to initiate use. And so that's just a little bit of the data from the parent survey that we wanted to share. And now I'm going to turn this over to you, Chrissy, to share some perspectives from the recent focus groups that were held in Dedham. So Chrissy, over to you.
All right, thank you so much, Jess. So as Jess said, I'm going to talk a little bit more in depth about parental attitudes on youth substance use, and I'm going to go over some tools on how parents can start conversations about these often kind of unspoken community norms. So in February, we held focus groups of Dedham parents, and these were to learn more about their attitudes and beliefs and behaviors on youth substance use. And now what we found, real quick. And what we found is that there are a lot of differing attitudes from parents in the community, and there's this feeling from the parents that participated in the focus group surveys that not only is drinking accepted in the community, but there's also this kind of ambivalence about whether or not it's acceptable to allow drinking in the home. Many parents highlighted their concern about the safety and well-being of their children. And some parents mentioned that they were afraid that if they didn't allow their children to drink in the home, that the children would sneak off and drink elsewhere. So there's this real tension and conflicted feelings about what the right thing is to do. How do I keep my kids safe? What's the best way to set these rules and expectations? So I'm going to go over very quickly some strategies that were mentioned in previous webinars. Parents can do a lot to protect their youth. They're the #1 influence on their child's decision whether or not to experiment with substances. Parent-child relationships, positive relationship building, just eating dinner together, feeling empowered, to monitor their child's behavior. For example, calling other parents before allowing your child to attend a social gathering at their home. And as we mentioned in the first webinar, communication, communication, communication. So again, some highlights from last webinars, but in this webinar in particular, I want to really stress that 2 of the most powerful prevention tools that parents have are 1, preventing access to substances, and 2, monitoring behavior. So preventing access to substances such as alcohol, examples of that are taking stock of your alcohol or locking it up, and by not permitting youth drinking in your home. Examples of monitoring behavior would be calling ahead to talk to parents of kids who are hosting parties. And I want to talk a little bit more about why we recommend not permitting youth drinking at social gatherings. There are 3 reasons that I want to highlight, and one of them is, as I mentioned at the beginning, that the adolescent brain is still developing, and so substance use in any amount has the potential to be risky to that brain development. So it's best to try to minimize as much as possible use. Another is that Jess had mentioned earlier that it's important to communicate disapproval of substance use, and I think allowing alcohol use can, in some teenagers' minds, translate in their heads to approval of substance use, whether or not that was intended to be the case. And I want to address the concern that a lot of parents think, well, they're going to do it anyways. But I want to point out that actually 70% of Dedham high schoolers don't drink, so it's not necessarily inevitable that kids will drink, and it doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to sneak off and do it somewhere else. And then finally, and we'll talk a little bit more about this a bit, there is the legal element of the social host liability. So in Massachusetts, if there's youth drinking in your home and something happens to one of the kids, God forbid, then that's actually a legal liability, and you can be held liable for it. So there are a lot of good reasons to just hold off on that and encourage social gatherings with youth that don't involve underage drinking. So again, I'm also going to highlight this calling ahead to other parents. I know it can be, maybe it can feel awkward Parents might feel, oh, I don't want to impose, I don't want to be annoying, but one of our most interesting results of the parent survey was that most parents of middle and high school students agree with the statement that they'd like other parents to call them. So it's something that is welcome, that's encouraged, just a, hey, are you going to be home? Hey, just want to make sure there's not going to be any alcohol use here. It doesn't have to be anything really fancy. And then finally, because I've mentioned communication with other parents so much, I want to go over some tools of the trade for having these sometimes potentially uncomfortable conversations about substance use. So, let's say for a fact that your neighbor is hosting a block party and allowing underage youth to have a few beers there, or let's say your child tells you that when her friend's mom isn't home, this friend has a party and sneaks from their parents' liquor cabinet without the mom knowing. So how do you have a conversation like that without making the other person feel attacked or accused? And a few principles to keep in mind. One is definitely consider your relationship with the parents. If you're really close with this person, you might have a foundation to have more of an in-depth conversation. If you don't know the parent at all, maybe you're not the best person to bring it up, but maybe there's some other parent that that would be better to bring it up, right? So you want to think about the constraints of the relationship, and definitely stick to objective information that you know for a fact. Is this something that you've actually seen, or did you just hear about it? And I would definitely stick to I statements. So rather than saying something like, oh, it's so irresponsible of you to do this, or your child is a bad influence on mine, things that can make people feel really attacked, you could just stick to your feelings and say things like, oh, I felt concerned when I heard about this, or I just don't feel comfortable allowing my child to go to this party, or I feel worried about how this is going to impact my child. Just stick to your feelings, and of course it's important to listen and don't assume you know what the situation is. You may not know all the facts, and this definitely isn't about giving the other person a lecture. It's just genuinely expressing your concern and trying to express your own boundaries that you want to have with your kid. And then finally, just be prepared to offer resources and support. Maybe the person that you're talking to isn't as familiar with this, some of the research about substance use impact on the brain. So it might just be a conversation where you could share some information with them. And at the end of the day, I'll end with this. You can't ultimately, you can't control what the other parent does. They might have a different opinion than you. They might continue to do what they're doing. You can't necessarily change their behavior. All you can really do is control your own response by talking, opening up those lines of communication, and then by setting boundaries for yourself and for your family. So to highlight some resources, there's the SAMHSA National Helpline, which can help connect people to mental health, behavioral health, and substance use treatment. There's also the Massachusetts Substance Use Helpline, which can refer youth and adults to substance use treatment. More to the point of what we were just talking about, there's this great document that Needham put together called Social Host Liability Law, What Will It Cost You? And it's this Q&A about all the different liabilities that can happen if you as a parent are the owner of a house where there is where there's underage drinking. And then more on these difficult conversations, there's a great article from Psychology Today. It's more general, but it gives more tips about how to have these important conversations without sparking defensiveness or bringing up, bad feelings. So with that, I want to thank you again, and we just covered a lot of ground, so I will open it up to questions in the chat box. I'll just give people a minute if they want to think of questions. Okay, so I don't see anyone typing questions, but if you think of anything, just shoot me an email. I'm happy to answer any questions about the folks group, parent survey, anything discussed here. You know, my inbox is always open. And we'll be recording this webinar so you can rewatch it. And with that, thank you so much for listening. We hope these webinars were helpful. We'd love feedback on them. And thank you so much to Jess and EDC and all the people who helped make these webinars happen. So have a good night, everyone. And we'll be in touch. Thank you.